want to begin on the bench talking about theory of operation. I firmly believe if you can understand the theory behind how a system or a part operates, then you can troubleshoot and repair it. And so is the case with these steering lock assemblies. I think even more so with the steering lock assemblies, you have to understand how Mercedes engineered the security features. Because you're not going to be able to get into a Mercedes-Benz and get on the dash and rip the wires out and spark them together and take off like you see in the movies. They did not want people to steal these cars. Now I've got 4 lock assemblies with the keys on the bench, ranging from the 1960s up to 1995. Now this is not all of them. I don't have samples of the 114 and the 115 here. They're a little different because you really can't change the tumbler assemblies. Now this is something out of a 108, probably about 1968. This is a steering lock assembly out of the R107, early up through 380 SL and the W116. This is a steering lock assembly out of the later W123 and the W126. And then this is a steering lock assembly out of the 90 to 95 models that had a special lockout cable to prevent you from shifting the transmission unless you had the key on. Now all of these have one thing in common, and that one thing is right here, this pin. See it? Now it's in different locations on different locks, but every one of them has a pin. And the pin is what keeps people from pulling these out of the steering column unless the key is turned on. Let me mount one of these up in a steering column and I'll show you how this operates. I have a steering lock assembly mounted up into a steering column on a 1982 W123 300 TD wagon. And this is pretty much how it all bolts together inside the dash. So it's very easy to see all this on the bench. Not quite so easy to see it all when it's in the car. We've already talked about the pin. Let's see if we can locate the pin. There's the pin right there. That's common to all of them for about 30 plus years. This is the clamp that clamps the steering lock tight into the column. Remember, the pin is only a locking device. The clamp is what tightens it down. If you didn't have the clamp, this would sit there and flop around, although it couldn't be removed because the pin's popped out and it's lodged into that hole there. So please don't lose your key, number one. And number two, fix this when it starts sticking. Because when it starts sticking, that's a warning it's going to have a heart attack. So that's just a word to the wise. If you get to a situation where it's starting to stick on you, you might want to remove it and get it fixed. If I turn the key to the number one accessory position, I can push the pin in. The pin goes in. But first I have to loosen up the clamp. Once the clamp's loose, you can see this is going to wiggle. So I will push this in, and then I can remove the steering lock. Just like that. Okay. Pretty simple, huh? Well, it's a little more difficult in the car, but it's still doable, particularly if you watch my series on removing these steering locks from these cars. What do you do when you lose the key or can't turn the key? That's going to be available in a separate video that's chassis based. You'll have one for the 107, 116, one for the 123, variation of the 126, and so on. I want to take a minute and talk to you about what I feel is causing all these steering locks to wear out. You know, it was 20 years ago that we sold a lot of tumblers. People would say, well, my tumbler is starting to stick like this. It's sticking, you know, so I'm just going to buy a new tumbler. And in most cases, it would fix the problem. But I'm finding today, because these steering locks are so old, that 80% of the time a new tumbler is not going to fix the problem of a sticking key. It's because of the wear inside this lock assembly that's primarily created by the snapping of the lock assembly when you pull the key out. Look at that. Can you imagine this? Time after time after time after time. Do I make my point? Snap, snap, snap. There's some critical parts in here that are literally wearing out. So you can go buy a new tumbler and stick it in there, and in many cases it won't fix the problem. In some cases it'll just lock it right up. So it's really important that you understand what causes these to wear out. It's really important to understand how to get these out if it should lock up. And we even have some modifications which will allow you to take these apart in the car without a key. So if you lose the key, you can actually pull the cap off, get the tumbler out, use a screwdriver to start the car. So we've decided to go after the steering lock issue with gusto. You remember I said that 20 years ago I wrote my first manual because we got so many questions about vacuum systems on diesels. Well, right now, probably one of the top questions we get at Mercedessource via email is related to some sort of ignition or steering lock problem.